March 27th, 1977. Los Rodeos Airport, Tenerife. Two Boeing 747s, the largest passenger aircraft in the sky, collide on a fog-shrouded runway. 583 people die in a fireball that consumes both jets. The deadliest accident in aviation history happens not in the air, but on the ground. And the cause? One word. Takeoff, heard by two flight crews in two entirely different ways. The fog that afternoon was so thick that controllers in the tower could not see the runway. Pilots taxiing could barely see their wingtips. Radio was the only link between aircraft and ground. And radio that day was about to fail in the most catastrophic way imaginable. Because in 1977 there was no global standard for the word pilots used to describe their position before departure. KLM Flight 4805 was accelerating down that invisible runway. The captain's certain he had clearance to go. Pan Am Flight 1736 was still on that same runway, trying to find the taxiway exit in the fog. Neither crew could see the other. The tower believed both aircraft were holding position. And the reason for this fatal misalignment? The KLM captain had said, "We are at takeoff." To him it meant he was departing. To the tower, it meant he was waiting at the takeoff position. March 27th, 1977. A bomb threat at Gran Canaria Airport forces every inbound flight to divert, including two Boeing 747s, the largest passenger jets in the sky. KLM Flight 4805 from Amsterdam and Pan Am Flight 1736 from Los Angeles both reroute to Tenerife North, a small regional airport in the Canary Islands never designed for wide-body traffic. The tarmac fills with displaced aircraft. There is no room. By afternoon, Gran Canaria reopens. The aircraft must leave Tomai. But Tenerife's single parallel taxiway is blocked by parked planes. The tower makes a decision. Departing jets will backtrack down the active runway itself, turn around at the far end, and take off from there. Pan Am, still refueling, will follow behind and exit onto a taxiway when able. It is an improvised choreography, legal but uncommon. Then the fog rolls in. Dense, fast-moving Atlantic mist swallows the runway. Visibility drops below 200 meters. The tower cannot see the aircraft. The pilots cannot see each other. KLM 4805 begins its backtrack in near-zero visibility, the captain eager to depart before duty time limits ground the flight. Somewhere ahead in the fog, Pan Am 1736 is still taxiing, searching for its exit. Two jumbos, one runway, no eyes. The tower controller had cleared KLM to taxi into position. What he heard next, through static and accented English, was the captain's voice. "We are at takeoff." To the controller, that sounded like a position report. "We are at the takeoff point, waiting." He replied with route instructions, not a clearance. But in the KLM cockpit, "We are at takeoff" meant something else entirely. "We are taking off. Right now." The tower controller responded immediately. "Okay, stand by for takeoff, I will call you." Clear words, wait for clearance. But his transmission overlapped with Pan Am's radio call, reporting they were still on the runway. The two signals collided in the air, creating a piercing squeal in every headset. In the KLM cockpit, all they heard was noise, a screech that obliterated both the controller's instruction to wait and Pan Am's warning that the runway was occupied. The tower had never said the word takeoff in a clearance, because there was no clearance. Protocol required the controller to say cleared for takeoff explicitly. He had not. But the KLM captain, under pressure from fuel limits and duty time regulations, heard what he expected to hear: permission. The flight engineer, reviewing the route clearance, asked hesitantly, "Is he not clear, that Pan American?" The captain's reply was curt. The throttles stayed forward. On the Pan Am jet, still backtaxiing through the fog to find their exit, the crew heard the squeal, then silence. They did not hear the tower's instruction to KLM to wait. They had no idea the other 747 was rolling. The first officer glanced out into the white wall of fog and said to the captain, "Let's get the hell out of here." They were searching for taxiway Charlie 3 when the KLM jet, accelerating to rotation speed, emerged from the cloud. But the tower's confusion was only half the problem. Inside KLM 4805's cockpit sat Captain Jacob van Zanten, KLM's head of flight training, the airline's public face in safety campaigns, a man whose image appeared in the company's advertisements. He had been delayed for hours. His duty time was running out. If he didn't depart soon, regulations would ground him overnight in Tenerife, stranding 300 passengers and costing the airline a fortune in hotel bills and missed connections. And that pressure collided with the cockpit culture of 1977. Captains were not questioned. They were gods in uniform. 4 stripes, absolute authority, decades of experience that junior crew challenged at their peril. The first officer sat to Van Zanten's right. The flight engineer sat behind them, monitoring fuel and systems. Both men were trained to defer, to trust, to assume the captain knew something they didn't. It was not cowardice. It was how aviation worked. So when KLM's flight engineer heard the tower's route clearance, not a takeoff clearance, and asked, "Is he not clear, that Pan American?" the captain's reply was immediate and certain. "Oh, yes." The engineer said nothing more. The first officer, who had acknowledged the route clearance, did not press the point. Van Zanten advanced the throttles. The 747 began to roll, and the 2 men beside him, who sensed something wrong, stayed silent. At 5:06 p.m, KLM's captain advanced the throttles. The 747 began to roll, slowly at first, then faster, the runway centerline invisible beneath the nose. 30 seconds into the takeoff run, the flight engineer glanced at his instruments and said quietly, "Is he not clear, that Pan Am?" The captain did not respond. The first officer monitoring the radio said nothing. The aircraft accelerated past V1, the point of no return. Ahead through the fog, Pan Am's captain saw lights. Not runway lights, something higher, moving. He shoved the throttles forward, trying to veer left off the pavement. KLM's captain, rotating at 160 knots, saw the same lights and pulled back hard, trying to lift clear. The 747's nose rose. The tail skid scraped pavement, showering sparks. The main gear, still on the ground, still accelerating, struck Pan Am's fuselage just behind the cockpit. The KLM jet climbed 300 feet, then stalled and fell back onto the runway, erupting in a fireball that consumed both aircraft. Of the 624 people aboard the 2 planes, 583 died, 248 on KLM, 335 on Pan Am. 61 Pan Am passengers in the forward section survived the initial impact and escaped through breaks in the fuselage before the fire reached them. It remains to this day the deadliest accident in aviation history. And it happened on the ground. The investigators arrived to find not a mystery, but a recording. KLM's cockpit voice recorder had survived the fire. When they played it back in a quiet room in The Hague, they heard the flight engineer ask, just before the takeoff roll began, "Is he not clear, that Pan Am?" The captain's reply was immediate. "Oh, yes." Then, seconds later, as the engine spooled to full thrust, the first officer's voice, quieter, almost to himself, "Let's check once more." But the captain did not check. He advanced the throttles. Tutsi Amr. The Dutch inquiry would later note that the captain had been under pressure. Fuel concerns, duty time limits, the delay at Tenerife. But the transcript showed something deeper. 2 crew members had sensed danger. Both deferred to rank. In 1977, the captain was the final authority in the cockpit, his judgment unquestioned. To challenge him was not merely impolite, it was, in the culture of the time, unthinkable. The first officer did not say, "Stop." He said, "Let's check once more," and then fell silent. Which meant the disaster was not mechanical. It was not weather. It was 2 failures that had never been named as failures before. The words pilots used were ambiguous, and the hierarchy that governed how they spoke to each other was absolute. The wreckage had revealed a truth the industry had not yet confronted, that the human system inside the cockpit was as fragile as any hydraulic line, and far more dangerous when it failed. Tenerife had killed 583 people. Now it would force aviation to redesign itself from the inside out. Within 18 months, the International Civil Aviation Organization issued a directive that changed every tower and cockpit on Earth. The word takeoff was now forbidden, except in one phrase, cleared for takeoff. Controllers could no longer say, "at takeoff position." Pilots could no longer report, "ready for takeoff." The new lexicon was surgical. Ready for departure. Line up and wait. Holding short. Every ambiguity that had lived in radio shorthand for 40 years was identified, named, and eliminated. The retraining was global and immediate. Every airline, every air force, every flight school rewrote their manuals. Pilots who had flown for 30 years learned new calls. Tower controllers in 100 languages adopted the same English phrases. Simulators added scenarios where crews practiced the new lexicon under pressure: fog, congestion, radio interference. The exact conditions that had killed 583 people. The change was not optional. It was written in blood. The disaster forced aviation to confront a truth it had never named. Technical skill was not enough. In 1979, United Airlines psychologist Robert Helmreich began teaching captains something radical: how to listen. NASA researcher John Lauber coined the term crew resource management. The idea was simple and, to many senior pilots, insulting. The cockpit was a team, not a throne. Authority remained, but it was no longer absolute. A first officer's doubt was now data, not insubordination. The training began with a film of actual cockpit voice recorder transcripts, crashes where junior crew had seen the danger and stayed silent. Pilots watched themselves in those transcripts. Then came role reversal exercises. Captains played first officers, forced to speak up. First officers played captains, forced to hear challenges without defensiveness. It was uncomfortable, often humiliating. But it worked. By the mid-1980s, CRM was spreading globally, rewriting the social contract of every cockpit. Today, every airline pilot trains in CRM from day one. Captains are taught to invite dissent. What am I missing? First officers are taught the escalation ladder: hint, suggest, question, warn, intervene. If a first officer says, "I'm taking the aircraft," the captain must yield or justify refusal on the record. It is the challenge culture born at Tenerife, and it saves lives daily, not in headlines, but in the 10,000 small corrections that never become accidents. Today, no pilot anywhere says at takeoff to mean they are departing. They say ready for departure. The tower replies line up and wait, or cleared for takeoff. Never anything in between. That change, and 10,000 others like it, came from Tenerife. Every sterile cockpit rule below 10,000 feet. Every CRM drill where captains practice listening and first officers practice speaking up. Every standardized call out in every language, on every airline in every country. 583 people died because takeoff meant two different things. They did not die in vain. They forced aviation to admit that perfect pilots in perfect machines could still kill everyone aboard if the words were wrong or the hierarchy unbreakable. The fog lifted. The rules changed. And every flight since, every safe landing, every challenge a captain hears and heeds, carries forward the memory of that runway.